Picture this. You're on a school bus going to school in the early morning. You're suddenly stopped by a red light. The railroad crossings suddenly activate at a nearby crossing. What you don't realize, though, is part of your bus is hanging over part of the tracks. You then hear the gate arm slap the rear end of your bus as it comes down. Then you look toward the track and see a 70-mile-per-hour commuter train with no way to stop as it heads toward you. Sounds like quite the nightmare, huh? Well, that nightmare was reality for a bunch of high school students in Fox River Grove, Illinois. On October 25th, 1995, Metra Express 624 is departing Crystal Lake Station bound for Chicago. It departs at 7 a.m. right on time. 624 is often known as the Flyer since it skips most stations at over 90 miles an hour as it heads down the Windy City. However, the buses at Crystal Lake School District were not having such morning luck. Most of the buses were departing on time at around 6:15 a.m., but the driver for School Bus 103 that was supposed to run Route 47/155 to Cary Grove High School didn't show up for work, so 54-year-old Patricia Kattenkamp, a safety supervisor, would have to substitute that day. She had prior experience with bus driving, but she was still rather new to this route. By the time she was ready to leave, the bus was already 20 minutes late. It was a rather cold fall morning, so some of the students still waiting outside had to quote-unquote huddle together to keep warm. The first two kids were picked up at the first stop at 6:55 a.m. The two helped to guide her through the route so she knew exactly where to go. By 7:05, the roads were backing up with the typical rush hour traffic. But as for 624, it was flying down the tracks at 60 miles an hour with no traffic stopping it. At 7:10, the last of 39 kids finally got on the bus, so now it was time to get to school. Freshman John Apson sat in the third row after sophomore Joe Calty, who stated that the back was for upperclassmen like himself and the front was for freshies like John. That little move would prove critical later. Seconds later, the train and bus's paths had to intersect at the Algonquin Road railroad crossing. They were approaching it around the same time, but the bus got there first. Kattenkamp stopped, looked, and listened, but she said she saw no train coming and proceeded across. But immediately after she started moving, a red traffic light stopped her at the other side of the crossing at an intersection. Behind the bus was Jim Hummela. He was stopped behind the bus and noticed a headlight from the approaching Metra. Suddenly, the crossings activate, warning of the oncoming Metra. Jim was rather concerned about where the bus was stopped, and he noticed the gate slap the buses from behind. Then Jim knew something was wrong. 3 inches of the bus's back hung over the tracks, and the Flyer is going full speed towards it. The engineer and the students were now facing one of the worst nightmares possible. The engineer could only slam his brakes, blow his horn, and pray the bus got out of the way. The kids at first joked about the situation, but when they saw how fast the train was approaching them, they began to panic and scream at the back of the bus. Then Jim realized that
It's the Flyer coming through.
the kids were freaking out. They were screaming, "There's a train coming! There's a train coming! Move! Move!" Some of them even tried to make efforts to get out of the bus on their own. Jim Hummela behind the bus was yelling, "Go! Go! Go!" Patricia Kattenkamp, however, was confused from the screaming and didn't understand. Sadly, no one's prayers were answered. Metra 624 T-bones the bus at over 40 miles an hour. The force of the impact shears the whole passenger compartment off the chassis of the bus, spinning it 180 degrees onto the side of the tracks. The police chief, who witnessed the whole scene from the police station down the street, immediately called in as many officers as he could and requested EMTs to dispatch to the scene. Helen Gretchel, a nurse for the dying, ran out of the nearby coffee shop to help save some of the badly injured students. Rescuers worked frantically to free the students from the mangled wreck of what was once their bus, while anxious parents awaited the news of their kids' conditions. 5 kids died on impact, and 2 others died not long after the impact. One of them, Jeff Clark, was being treated by Helen with a turkey baster, trying to help him breathe by getting the blood out of his lungs, but he died in her arms. Tiffany Schneider, who was Jeff's friend, also died. She had just gotten her first paycheck at her first job that would sadly never be checked in. The sophomore, Joe Culte, who told freshman John to sit in the front, also died. He had car trouble that morning, and his decision to tell John to move up practically saved the freshman's life. 21 students suffered minor injuries, as did Patricia Kattenkamp, the driver. So you gotta wonder, how could such a nightmare unfold on an average October morning? And why? Was it solely the driver's fault? The NTSB investigation found several factors to the crash. First off, the crossing was badly designed. These kind of intersections are known as interconnected crossings because of the need to link the railroad signals to the road signals to ensure safe passage. The crossing was one of an inherently dangerous design in that a long vehicle could be trapped partially on the crossing while being held by a red light at the intersection. At the crossing itself, the distance between the crossing and the stop line was 30 feet. The bus, 38 feet long. If the driver realized this danger, she would have been forced to pull through the red light to clear the tracks when the crossing's activated. Some witnesses said there was a car preventing the bus from moving any forward, but investigators dismissed this theory as it was proven false. She could have pulled forward, but she didn't. Also, according to tests conducted by the NTSB, the warning lights on the railroad crossing activated 20 seconds before the arrival of the Metra train. However, the traffic lights clearing the rail intersection only allowed cars to clear 18 seconds after they activated, giving cars only 2 to 6 seconds to clear the tracks. Roadway signal timing was under the jurisdiction of Illinois Department of Transportation, while railway timing was under the jurisdiction of the Union Pacific. No communication took place between both parties regarding interconnected signal timings. It was reported that the crossings had originally been given a safe margin pass, but have been modified some months previously to allow a pedestrian crossing cycle, overlooking the possible consequences at the railroad crossing. The signal would rest in the walk indication for pedestrians during the morning commute period, but when a train is detected, this interval must be ended, which takes up about 12 seconds of the warning time as the train approached. Pedestrian volumes at this crosswalk were extremely light, according to a survey conducted by the Village of Fox River Grove in May 1996. IDOT traffic engineers responsible for establishing signal timings should have recognized that in this particular case, resting in the walk carries substantial risk and virtually no benefit, and should have not allowed the traffic signal to rest in the pedestrian walk interval. If the traffic signal had not been serving the non-existent pedestrian, the bus would have had a green light 12 seconds earlier than it did, and the collision may have been avoided. In addition, the thumb wheel setting on the crossing processor that determines how long it takes before the crossing fully activates was reduced from 30 seconds to 25 seconds 2 weeks before the crash. Union Pacific officials, however, stated that the new value was still above the FRA's limit of 20 seconds. However, that doesn't excuse the driver from anything. Patricia Kattenkamp failed to properly judge the distance between the railroad tracks and the stop line at the traffic signal across the tracks. The failure of the judgment meant that around 3 inches of the back of the bus hung over the nearest rail, while the body of the Metra train extended 3 feet past the rail. All the injuries were sustained during this initial impact. Then, an interesting fact. The NTSB concluded that the traffic signal did turn green 6 seconds before the initial impact, but because Kattenkamp was so distracted by what she presumed was some crisis within the bus, she didn't see the light turn green. It was a final warning that never came through. In the end, the remains of the school bus were held at the McHenry County Evidence Pound in Heartland Township, but it eventually was hauled away for scrap. And new route designs brought the number of routes crossing railroad tracks in the District 47 and District 155 school systems down from 70% in 1996 to 10% in 1997. However, ever since the accident, Patricia Kattenkamp, the driver, would never drive a school bus again. But she still worked for the school district transportation division for another 5 years before retiring in 1999, then moving out of state. She never spoke publicly. Her friends, interviewed after the accident, said she was devastated. So was the train's engineer, Ford Dotston Jr., who wept during the 1996 NTSB hearing while recalling his inability to stop the train in time. A large granite memorial and 2 plaques were placed in memory of the 7 students killed in the crash near the site. The Fox River Grove Public Library was renamed the Fox River Grove Memorial Library, which includes an outdoor memorial seating area with the names of the 7 students. A memorial outside the high school the bus was headed to was also added. 23 years have passed since the accident. Bus routes now don't go over train tracks as often across the United States, so hopefully an accident like this never happens again.